Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a truly modern investigation, one where the most damning witness wasn't some bystander off the street, but the very devices sitting right inside the suspect's pocket. We're going to break down exactly how a killer's own digital obsession, specifically an extensive trail of self-recorded videos and GPS data, completely dismantled his alibi and cracked a heroin case wide open.
I'm a killer man. I love to kill. We have to start with this incredibly chilling text message sent by our suspect, Paul DeWise. It really sets the dark tone for the digital breadcrumbs we're about to follow. See, when this devastating crime occurred, investigators didn't just have to rely on physical clues or word of mouth. They actually had a direct window into the suspect's mind through his own electronic communications.
It's a fascinating question, right? We live in an era where our devices are constantly pinging our locations, recording our searches, and documenting our entire lives. But what happens when someone uses these exact tools, not just for daily convenience, but for obsessive control? Well, let's find out.
First, let's get into the initial facts of the horrific January 2018 shooting of Lauren DeWise and Ashley Van Hammer. On a freezing morning in Gallatin County, Montana, police were called to a home where they made a truly devastating discovery. Lauren, who was Paul's estranged wife, had been fatally shot. Her roommate, Ashley, was in critical condition with multiple gunshot wounds, though she miraculously survived.
Now, the crime scene was completely chaotic, but investigators immediately spotted key physical evidence. The back door had been broken in, and critically, there were very distinct boot prints leading right through the snow in the backyard. Naturally, police questioned Paul, and he insisted up and down that he was entirely innocent, offering a very specific alibi for his whereabouts that night.
Paul was so confident. He tried to use convenience store footage as his ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card. He literally told detectives he went out to a town pump store to grab a six-pack of beer around midnight, and his kids even corroborated the story. He honestly thought placing himself on camera far from the crime scene would clear his name, but instead, it firmly anchored his timeline.
Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Paul had been obsessively documenting his own unraveling marriage. Over the months leading up to the crime, his and Lauren's relationship had severely deteriorated. So, to exert control and to try and prove he was actually the victim of a failing marriage, Paul started recording their domestic disputes on his cell phone.
He constantly recorded their arguments, desperately attempting to control the narrative. But he was unwittingly capturing his own abuse. In these videos, he says things like, "I'm recording this to prove I'm not yelling," yet the audio reveals this intense, aggressive hostility. These videos, which were intended to be his defense, actually handed investigators a massive archive of his escalating rage and his constant surveillance of his wife.
And this brings us to the power of digital forensics. Through this lens, Paul's devices became the objective truth against his lies. Every video he took, every location he searched, and every single message he sent created an indestructible, chronological map of his intentions. You know, physical evidence can be hidden or washed away, but digital data, it is stubbornly permanent. So the crucial turning point here is how his obsession escalated into blatant, trackable digital stalking. When Lauren finally moved out to stay with Ashley and another roommate, Paul didn't just let her go. He weaponized his devices to hunt her down. He needed to know where she was at all times, and that desperation left a massive GPS footprint. The data paints a clear, escalating pattern. In November, he used their shared phone locations to track her all the way to a Chicago bar. By December, Apple Maps data showed him running searches for her exact coordinates in the middle of the night. And then, by late December, his own son actually witnessed him installing a physical GPS tracker directly onto Lauren's vehicle.
His phone basically acted like a detective's notebook, cataloging this deeply disturbing mix of desperation and revenge. Investigators found photos he'd taken of cars parked in the driveway of Lauren's new residence, dead in the middle of the night. His search history was a wild pendulum, swinging between looking up how to make your wife fall in love and searching for things like Monk's Bane and revenge laws.
And then, the digital evidence begins to directly overlap with the physical evidence from the crime scene. Remember those boot prints found in the snow outside the broken-in back door? Investigators desperately needed to match those prints to place Paul at the scene. Well, they didn't just find the boots in his closet. They found them right there in his digital archives. Get this. His obsessive habit of taking photos, ironically, gave investigators crystal-clear images of the exact boots that matched those snowy footprints.
Paul had previously forced his 15-year-old son Joe to tag along on his stalking excursions and ultimately to the crime scene itself. Photos right there on Paul's phone show Joe wearing boots with a tread that perfectly matched the prints found that freezing morning.
The timeline that emerges from this data is absolutely terrifying. At 10:58 p.m., Lauren rejected his invitation to go to church. Sometime in the next hour, Paul drove to her house, broke in, and committed the murders. At 12:34 a.m., he creates his so-called alibi at the convenience store. Then, the very next morning at 10:02 a.m., he sends her a manipulative text asking for another chance, completely pretending he doesn't know she's already dead.
4. That is the exact number of Murderous Affairs episodes Paul's Netflix account history shows he binged right before leaving his house that night. Literally every digital service he touched was painting a vivid picture of his mindset. Right before he got that final rejection text from Lauren, his streaming history proved he was consuming content directly related to domestic homicide.
Using his son's eventual confession, which by the way was perfectly corroborated by the digital timeline, investigators mapped out the ruthless, calculated steps Paul took. He grabbed a pistol. He forced his teenage son to put on a mask and walk in front of him. He kicked in the back door, pushed his son inside, and headed upstairs to fire multiple shots before rushing home to manufacture his alibi.
But ultimately, Paul's obsessive recording habit is what truly sealed his fate. For months, he had been telling his friends, his kids, and the police that he was the victim here, vehemently denying he ever physically abused Lauren. But his digital hoarding contained one massive, devastating oversight.
In a twist he absolutely never saw coming, an audio file sitting right there on his own device accidentally captured him threatening to kill her. While he was so busy trying to record his wife to catch her in a lie, he inadvertently captured his own voice delivering a lethal promise, calling her a, quote, lying piece and saying, "I am going to kill you, you got to die." It was the ultimate objective witness. No memory loss, no bias, just the cold, hard truth. To wrap up this massive web of digital evidence, the very tools Paul used to manipulate reality became the ironclad proof that took him down. The surveillance video he thought saved him tightened his timeline. The GPS data proved his obsession. The timestamped photos linked him directly to the scene, and his own recordings proved his deadly intent. Found guilty, Paul was sentenced to 220 years in prison. A sentence driven largely by the digital footprint he meticulously and foolishly curated all by himself. The jury didn't just have to take the prosecutor's word for it. They could literally watch his actions on a map, read his threats, and hear the malice in his own self-recorded audio.
In an age where literally every single action creates a data point, the truth is almost always just waiting to be downloaded. And it leaves us with this chilling final thought. If our devices are silently recording our every move, search, and word, can anyone truly outsmart their own digital footprint?